Principle number 1, elections are first and foremost acts of millions of individual people. Citizens who register and vote, candidates who offer themselves for office, poll workers who put in long days at the precinct, and election officials who supervise the process. Honest, intelligent, responsible people will make most systems of technology work. Principle number 2, voting should be simple, convenient, and a friendly process that encourages each responsible citizen to express his or her votes. Enduring principle 3, voting systems should be designed to determine voter intent to the extent that it is humanly possible. 4, voting methods for statewide and national elections should meet uniform statewide and national standards for fairness, reliability, and equal protection. 5th, elections must achieve 2 competing goals: certainty and finality. And finally, while voting should be individual and private, procedures for counting and challenging votes should be open, transparent, and easily documented to ensure public confidence in the results. Now, that was the 6 enduring principles that this task force identified as critical to ensuring that Florida would never have a repeat. And it was with great frustration to see this document, which was submitted to the legislature in March of 2001, essentially turned on its head and stripped of these key principles. For example, let me just make an aside here. I heard a legislator here, it was a House member, say, well why does the state have to pay for these voting systems? Voting is a county responsibility. Maybe we shouldn't pay. And this was in response to Charlie Crist's bill, which requires the state to pay to replace defective systems. Well, I'll tell that legislator why the state should pay. Because the state received this document, and if they would have followed it, that would have ended the issue.
That's right.
But they didn't follow it. We do not have open, transparent, and easily documented elections to determine what the outcomes are. We don't have any voting systems except optical scan voting systems, which allow us to determine voter intent. And what the legislature did at the close of the 2001 election system was to throw this document in the trash can. And all I want the Florida legislature to do is live up to the words on the paper that they commissioned for their own use and decided to discard. And by making the decision, a conscious decision, to disregard these critical components to ensure that Florida's elections could, in fact, never again be on the late night show and the butt of jokes of Jay Leno, they could have done that. They could have done that if they adopted recommendation number 12 that said there should be a uniform and standard statewide voting system for the state of Florida. That should be an optical scan voting system. That was recommendation number 12. And that went into the trash can. And there was a very important reason that the task force made this recommendation. Because the Caltech MIT voting project, probably the most famous individual voting project ever done on voting technology in this country, identified nationwide county-level election returns for the presidential election years of 88, 92, 96, and 2000. And when they examined all these voting technologies, here's what they found. They found that MarkSense or optical scan voting systems had a lower error rate than touchscreen voting systems. Even a bigger surprise to the authors of the study, although it's no surprise to the people in Sarasota or Miami-Dade or Broward, since they opted for those systems, even a bigger surprise to the MIT Caltech scientists were that the error rate for touchscreens were as high as punch card voting systems. And the key element here is that since you can't overvote on a touchscreen because it refuses to do that, the entire error rate was due to undervoting. If we had followed the document's recommendation, we would not have had the problems that are certainly present in Sarasota, which has garnered a lion's share of the news. But ladies and gentlemen, Sarasota is in the headlines because a well-funded candidate was able to marshal resources, and she raised a lot of money to be able to hire the kind of legal team to do the kind of research necessary to get to first base. And the state has had to try to deal with it as best as it could, which in terms of the Division of Elections technical staff is not very well. But in 3 other counties, are you aware that in Charlotte County, the error rate in the Attorney General's rate in terms of undervotes is higher than the undervote in Sarasota, which was 14%? In Charlotte County, the undervote in the Attorney General's race was 22%. There is no examination going on by the state of Florida into why 22% of all of the voters failed to vote in the state attorney general's race. Excuse me. They're only focusing on Sarasota because Sarasota had the good sense to bring in people like Reggie Mitchell and others that actually could advocate for voters. I guess they didn't care about the attorney general's race. And I'm talking about the state of Florida, not People for the American Way. Again, the recommendation of this 2001 task force: only one voting system currently meets all the necessary standards. That's a quote right out of this document. The state certified mark sense or optical scan voting system. The documentation was available for the Florida legislature if they wanted to read it. The documentation that if we went with touchscreens we would have problems with undervoting was present if the legislature would have read it. So we're here today because of the failure of that body to in fact implement what a bipartisan, that includes Republicans, including the former Secretary of State Jim Smith, recommended: optical scan voting systems, paper ballots. And that's why the state has a responsibility to pay to clean up its own mess. I would like to say that Governor Christ has responded in a way that I've never seen the executive branch respond to this issue since I've been a commissioner. His proposal to replace the touchscreens with optical scanners, as Bill has pointed out, is tremendous. We've got to do that. And that's what I would call the good part of the bill. And he's already mentioned the bad part of the bill. Yes, we're going to have audits, but they will be after the election is certified. Do you know Florida law says that if you certify the election and you get different totals, you may not change those totals. So the certification nullifies the auditing provisions in the governor's bill. What is that but simply window dressing? Oh, we better put in auditing to quiet those citizens who really want to make sure their votes count. Let's put in auditing, yeah. Well, we'll put it in after the certification so it's meaningless. Well, meaningless audits are worse than no audits at all because they would give the illusion that something is actually done benefiting the citizens. audits, and you've heard them from several of the speakers here, and the league's position is clear as a bell. You've got to have mandatory, random audits of those paper ballots, because as we showed in the documentary Hacking Democracy, you can take paper ballots, put it through a software of a computer, and you may not end up with the candidate that you voted for. So without auditing, even the best technology cannot ensure that your vote will count. Let's put the pressure, not on the governor, I think he's done a good faith effort, but on the legislature and particularly the House of Representatives of the state of Florida, which has scheduled no hearings on even the governor's own proposal. Whereas in the Senate, we've had 2 public meetings, open to anybody who has appeared. And a number of you who have in the audience actually have spoken at those meetings. Where is the Florida House of Representatives? Speaker Rubio, you had 100 ideas that you said were important. I only have one. Do your job instead of playing politics with the people's right to vote. Thank you very much.
I consider him the greatest nonpartisan in the state and probably in the country. He's a great man, an example to all nonpartisans. I would just like to also mention a little bit of history here. I'm the state representative for verified voting, and the VVPB movement, that's the voter verified paper ballot movement, has its origins in the governor's task force. The moment I read that document, I knew the way to end this was by fulfilling the dreams of the supervisors of elections in this state. And Governor Chris, I know you're listening, but listen to the supervisors. We've had a disastrous Secretary of States, one after another, since Catherine Harris. Kurt, if you're listening, you got to fix the problems they started. Listen,